When you look at the symbol that you see on the Great Seal of this truncated pyramid, it is an expression of the satanic hierarchy, which I'll explain in a moment, but it's also a deliberate slap in the face of the Lord Yeshua. Let me explain why. There's a very famous prophecy that Yeshua gives where he says in Matthew 21, he talks first of all about the idea of the stone which the builder is rejecting becoming the headstone of the corner. Now that's a very strange expression. And I believe nothing in the Bible is left to chance. When you think about it, what is this stone that's the headstone of the corner? How can it be on a corner and be a headstone? We all know what a cornerstone is. It's on the corner of a building. Well, what is the headstone of a corner? Well, I would submit to you that the only way you can have an architectural structure that has a headstone of a corner is for it to be a pyramid. And Yeshua is the headstone of the corner of the pyramid. That is his rightful place. Now you'll notice that here they put this stupid all-seeing eye in there in its stead. Now let me explain this. See, there's a prophetic component here because Yeshua says this about this stone. He says in Matthew 21:42, did you never read in the scriptures, the stone which the builders rejected, the same has become the head of the corner. This is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Therefore I say unto you, the kingdom of God shall be taken from you and given to a nation bringing forth the fruits thereof. Now notice this. And whoever shall fall upon this stone shall be broken, but on whomsoever it shall fall, it will grind him into a powder. Now think about that. If he is the stone, which obviously that's the case without dispute, and the stone is a pyramid, think of it this way. What happens if you fall on a pyramid? It's got a sharp object on top and you break. What happens if a pyramid falls on you? Squash, flat. You're ground to a powder. Now what that actually symbolizes on a deeper level, when we talked about the 4 levels of Scripture, is that the first advent of the Lord involves us falling on him and being broken. In other words, being broken, having our hearts be broken, having our consciences be broken, so that we come to repentance, to teshuvah, as it is in the Hebrew, and to receive Yeshua as Messiah, as our Savior and Lord. The second advent is he's coming and he's going to squash everybody flat that's wicked. So it's like the first one is more gentle because he's offering himself to us as our Savior, and if we fall on him and are broken, we can be saved. But the second time he comes, watch out. You know, if you aren't in the kingdom, you're going to be ground to a powder. And this fits so perfectly with the idea of the first and second advents of Yeshua. Now, by creating this frustrum, this truncated pyramid, they're falsely believing that they can prevent the stone from completing the true pyramid, thus preventing Messiah from coming back a second time. And obviously they're deceiving themselves. Now, let me kind of decode this thing. The Latin there basically can be translated, this is the way I prefer to translate it, and I've had several years of Latin, Annuit Chaptus Novus Ordo Seclorum. This year begins the new world order, or the new order of the ages. And of course we know back in the days of the first Bush administration was when we first started hearing the term New World Order as a buzzword. Well, it's been on our stationery, so to speak, for 200 years. But the New World Order is the goal of the Illuminati, basically. And that's why we need to get kind of nervous when our presidents start talking in that kind of Illuminati code. You'll notice there's all of these ranks of pyramid stones, and you'll notice there's a Roman numeral at the bottom, which might be a little fuzzy for you to see, but trust me on this, you probably looked at it yourself. If not, whip out a dollar bill and check me out. It's the Roman numeral for 1776, the year 1776. And everybody says, well, that's understandable. That's the year America was founded. No, it wasn't. America was not founded. That's the year the Declaration of Independence was written. But it wasn't until several years after that that the Constitution was put together, the Bill of Rights, the Continental Congress, all that stuff. That happened later. I'll tell you what started in 1776, the Illuminati. That was when, on May 1st, which is a high satanic holiday, Adam Weishaupt started the Illuminati in the year 1776. So when this thing says, this year begins the New World Order, it isn't talking about the United States of America, unfortunately. It's talking about Illuminism in its current incarnation. Because as we've seen, it's been down through the centuries. Now, to break this down still further, let's look at those individual ranks. What people don't understand is that when I say a rank on a pyramid, that in Masonry means a layer of stones. So you've got an ever smaller layer of stones going up. And here's how it breaks down if you decode it. This represents the hierarchy, at least as it exists here in America. First of all, at the very bottom, you have just plain old Blue Lodge Masonry. Then you have above that Scottish Rite or York Rite Masonry. So far, this is stuff most people know about if they know anything at all about Masonry in the United States. Then you have the shrine. And a lot of people don't realize some very nasty stuff goes into the shrine. I talk about that on my other tape, The Light Behind Masonry. And it's not the nice, benevolent organization people like you to think. Then, once you become either the pinnacle of the York Rite, which is a Knight Templar, notice that the highest level of the York Rite is to be a Knight Templar. The highest level of the Scottish Rite is to be a 32nd degree Sublime Prince of the Royal Secret. Once you get to those two levels, then you can go into the shrine, and then if you're an extraordinary Mason, either because of political fame, because of some other sort of fame, because of economic clout, or maybe because of lifetimes of service to the lodge, you might be eligible, a very small number, to become a 33rd degree Mason. That's a Grand Sovereign Inspector General. Don't you just love these titles? They're so humble. Anyway, so for example, a lot of times you'll see very famous people, either captains of industry, politicians. You'd be amazed how many darlings of the conservative realm are 33rd degree Masons. Jesse Helm, Strom Thurmond, Bob Dole. Also in other fields, Norman Vincent Peale. That's why when people, I've heard the joke, I find Peale appalling and Paul appealing. Because Norman Vincent Peale is not even a Christian. I don't know if is he still alive? I forget. I think he may have even died. But anyway, the guy, I saw the guy years ago on Phil Donahue saying that the greatest spiritual experience he ever had was in a Buddhist temple in Japan. So I got to worry about a guy like that, especially when he's continually endorsing Masonry. Roy Rogers, 33rd degree Mason. Burl Ives, 33rd degree Mason. The guy that founded Wendy's, Dave Thomas. Lots of important people are 33rd degree Masons. That you see the kind of level of person you have to be. Many presidents. I think the last president to be, I could be wrong, to be a 33rd degree Mason was Harry Truman. MacArthur was a 33rd degree Mason too, Douglas MacArthur. So anyhow, this is the pinnacle of normal exoteric, in other words, out in the open for everybody to see, Masonry. Now, above them is the Supreme Council of Grand Sovereign Inspectors General of the 33rd degree. And they are the ones that sit in their temple in Washington, D.C., 13 blocks, notice that, from the White House. And it's from that temple that the spider spins its web, as far as most of what goes on in America is concerned. Above that, we've already mentioned, is the Order of the Trapezoid. That is the higher level of street legal Satanism. Above that is the ancient and primitive rite of Memphis and Mizraim, which has 97 degrees in it. That's the group of what I call Egyptian Masonry, where I got up to 90th degree in. Above that is the Ordo Templi Orientis, the Order of Eastern Templars. And that was the occult sex magic group that Aleister Crowley was given reign over by Theodore Royce for the English-speaking world. Crowley was made the head of that. And that's interesting. I want to tell this story because this is important for what we're going to say in a minute. How did that happen? Well, Crowley was famous for writing sort of scatological poetry. He thought himself to be a great poet. Actually, most of his poetry kind of, but anyway. He wrote this one poem in which he said, I may not be exact quote, but he says something to the effect, let the mystic be armed with the magician be armed with the mystic rood and the rosy cross. And that was, he privately published, he was very rich because his father was a brewery guy who got, believe it or not, his father was a Plymouth Brethren. He got born again, became a Plymouth Brethren, sold his brewery, and then he used most of the money from selling his brewery because he didn't think as a Christian he should run a brewery, amen. And then he went around the country as a traveling preacher. And Crowley used a lot of that money to self-publish his books because no one else would. And anyway, within a few days there was a knock on his door, and Dr. Theodor Reuss was standing there from Germany. And he said, how dare you reveal the highest secrets of the OTO in a printed publication? And Crowley goes, huh? And he points to that line that I just quoted. And see, that's a veiled reference to sexual magic, which is what you are taught in the OTO. How to live forever through the rites of sex magic and sexual vampirism. Moving along, then we have the Palladium. This is commonly known as 34th degree, although that's an unofficial designation. I was in this. This is where you get into the Congress of Demons. Then above them, and I was talking about this to somebody over the break, the 9 unknown men. These are people who are maybe marginally known among the circles in which they travel, but are basically not household names. And there's one of these men who reigns for the Illuminati over each continent. So there's one over North America, one over South America, one over Europe, one over Australia, etc., etc. And nothing happens in those countries of any significance without that unknown man's permission. And if something does happen of significance, the person that did it is in big, big doo-doo. 2 examples would be Kennedy and Nixon, both of whom were destroyed one way or another by the Illuminati because they did something the Illuminati didn't want them to do. So anyhow, there are 9 unknown men, and they report directly to a group called the 7. And the 7, I knew who the unknown guy was for America at one time, but he passed away back in the early 90s, and I don't know who replaced him, but above them are these beings called the 7, and I was given to believe that they're fallen angels, that they are very high-level principalities, just like Paul talks about in Ephesians 6, verse 12. And they report directly to Lucifer, the great architect of the universe, T-G-O-A-O-T-U. And of course, that's the all-seeing eye, the great architect of the universe. That is the outer name that Masons call their God, the great architect of the universe. Because remember, an architect doesn't create anything. A creator creates out of nothing. That's what Yahweh God does. But the architect is Lucifer. He thinks. So anyhow, this is a, if you will, a blueprint of the hierarchy of Illuminism right on the back of our Great Seal. Now, isn't that wonderful? Now, sexual vampirism, Freemasonry, and the cult of the child. I've already alluded to sexual magic. Right when I was involved in all this, this was relatively unknown. Now you can go into any Borders bookstore and buy books by various weirdo people about sex magic, or the term that's used for it in Sanskrit in Hinduism is Tantra. Have you ever heard of Tantra yoga? That's sexual magic. And this is the idea, that you can reach divine consciousness through the sexual act. And there's 2 paths. Notice we're back to these 2 pillars again. There's the right pillar and the left pillar. The right pillar is called Mayathuna, and that's right-hand Tantra, and that's supposedly good. And then there's the left-hand pillar, which is Vamamarg, the left-hand path, which is supposedly female, lunar, and nasty. So there's sexism even in that. And believe it or not, this stuff is alluded to even in the entered apprentice degree of Blue Lodge Masonry. This is the secret, the royal secret that I'm about to tell you. And what I'm going to tell you is this. Part of the Masonic catechism that you have to learn as an entered apprentice is you're asked, you know, why have you come here? And the answer is supposed to be to learn to subdue my passions and improve myself in Masonry. Now that sounds noble enough, but you got to understand what that means. See, right hand Tantra involves the man learning how to control his passions. And I don't know how explicitly you want to get here. I'll just tell you a supposedly true story about a Dalai Lama. You all know the Dalai Lama, right? You know, well, there's supposedly, you know, this succession of him that he's reincarnated into, which is, of course, Hui. But one of the earlier Dalai Lamas was noted for being kind of a man about town. He'd have many women come and visit him, even though he was a monk. And finally, a bunch of the bigwigs in Tibet got together and decided they had to complain. So they went to the Potala, which is the palace in Lhasa, where the Dalai Lama used to reside before the Chinese communists came in there. And he was standing on the roof of the Potala. And they came to him and they said, you know, Holiness, this is not right. You can't be behaving like this. It's causing a scandal. You're running around with all these women and everything. And what do you think he did? He walked over to the edge of the parapet of this palace, lifted his robes, and proceeded to urinate over the palace. And the urine trickled down and, you know, did what urine does, and then it stopped in midstream and went back into the urethra. And then he dropped his robes and he turned around and he said, when you can do that, you can presume to tell the Dalai Lama what to do. Now, that story is to conceal the secret of sexual magic, which is it's believed that two people, this is right hand now, and I don't want to get too explicit here, but to basically say this, when two people are having intercourse, it is believed that if the man can hold himself from having a complete experience and stay at a level of nearly there but without going over the top, that a huge amount of magical energy can be built up like a storage battery, because you've got the two poles, the man and the woman, male, female, yin, yang, the whole bit. And then finally, after, and there are Alan Watts, who is an Episcopal priest turned Buddhist monk, actually practiced this, where he could do this for 5 or 6 hours at a time with his wife. And then at the end, when you finally release, then you're able to draw the fluids back in with the woman's fluids. And this is sexual alchemy. And they believe by doing this, they will live forever, by the mingling of the male and female seeds, fluids, being drawn back into the male organ. And then the woman gets the same benefit. And this is interesting, because if you study alchemy, there's many levels of alchemy, which is kind of an occult form of chemistry, if you will. And oddly enough, there are Christian alchemists back in the days of the Protestant Reformation, even this very day, that practice it on a different level. But if you ever go into a drugstore sometimes and they have all of these old alchemical instruments sitting up on the shelf where they have their drugs, they all, if you look at them, they all have a sexual meaning. They all either look like, you know, uterine symbols or phallic symbols. That's because this was a symbol of that. And this is when they talk about things like the red lion and the white gluten and all these weird things in alchemy. This is what they're referring to. So the idea of being able to preserve, to withhold your passions, quote unquote, that was believed to be the key to living forever. And that's the promise that is held out to people that practice this kind of tantra, right-hand tantra. And it's reported, I don't know if this is true, that Alan Watts and his wife actually allowed themselves to be hooked up and tested with medical instruments when they were doing this. And they said by the time 5 hours had gone by, there was a visible light in the room where they were doing this. Because they had all these wires hooked up to them, like they do in hospitals, and they were measuring, and he was able to maintain a level like that for 5 hours with his wife. And supposedly it brings a level of intimacy, these people say, which is totally unlike anything that normal sexual relations experiences. So this is the good part. The bad part is left-hand path. The left-hand path is believing that you don't have to do any of that stuff, that you just simply do, sexual vampirism, to be delicate about it. And here's where it gets really very disgusting, because black magicians do this, and they believe that they are pursuing the elixir of life, the philosopher's stone. You remember the Harry Potter book, the very first one, the sorcerer's stone, they called it in America. In Europe, in England, it was called the philosopher's stone, because the philosopher's stone is this substance that you produce in alchemy that will enable you to live forever and have immortality. So, I need to back up. Let me explain this. This is pretty nasty stuff, but these people believe that by, for example, having sex with a child, they can get more life energy than with an adult, because a child has many, many years of life. And so that's why you have all these supposed perverts running around as pedophiles. I'm not saying all of them know about this. Some of them are just doing this because they're, demon-possessed to their eyeballs. But people within black magic do this because they believe that by vampirizing children sexually, that they will live forever. And they actually suck the life force out of the child. Whether male or female, doesn't matter, boy or girl. And this is obviously horribly nasty stuff. But it's why many people that get involved in Masonry start finding themselves attracted to children. And there's another reason for this, which I'm going to get into in a minute. But this is something that is very, very abominable. But yet it's something that's really happening out there. And it's why I think there's a cascade of events that have caused the epidemic of child sexual abuse in this country. Aleister Crowley, I've already mentioned him. He liked to call himself the wickedest man in the world. And he deliberately changed his name from Edward Alexander Crowley to Aleister Crowley, because Aleister Crowley added up to 666 in 3 different languages, Hebrew, Greek, and English. And he believed that he received a new revelation in 1904 called the Book of the Law, Liber al vel Legis. And this Book of the Law is this short 3-chapter scripture that's very blasphemous. It's highly anti-Christian, and it exalts a god named Hadith, a goddess named Nuit, and the crowned and conquering child named Rehur Kuit or Horus. Now, see, he taught that there were 2 ages before this current one. There was the age of the goddess, Isis or Nuit. Then there was the age of the the slain and risen God, which was Jesus or Osiris. And now it's time, in 1904 supposedly, for the slain and risen God to step down and for a new God to ascend the throne in the east. And this new God is Horus, the crowned and conquering child. See, Horus is the child of Isis and Osiris. This is an image of Horus. He's the hawk-headed god. And I don't know how well you can see that, but he's basically portrayed there as having the head of a hawk and the body of a man. And he is to be the god of this new aeon, as Crowley said. Now, what's interesting is that Crowley believed he was the prophet. He was like John the Baptist to bring forth this new religion, which he called Crowleyanity. This guy had no problem with ego. And in fact, he's famous for making the statement that he believed the greatest spiritual experience any woman could ever have was to have sex with him, meaning Crowley. So this guy obviously had an ego the size of, Montana. But what happened is, because of the magic he did, and he did several very powerful magical workings, the Cairo working in 1904 and the Almantra working in 1918 in New York City, that basically unleashed an entirely new strain of spiritual virus, which has since infected the world. And what is this virus? Well, it's the virus, I call it, of the fascinating child. That's the term he used. And, don't want to go there yet. What I mean by that is, since Crowley did all of these workings, and then what he did is, he was one of the two people that put together the Book of Shadows of Wicca, which is white witchcraft. And so he inserted a lot of this stuff into white witchcraft. So when you started having Wiccans coming out of the woodwork a generation later in the 1950s, this was spreading. It was like a carrier wave that spread this virus, where people were finding children sexually interesting all of a sudden. Because let's face it, what sort of a crazed individual looks as a young child, like 1 or 2 years old, as a sex object? I mean, you've got to be demon possessed to your eyeballs. And all of these witches and Satanists and everything, they're all carriers of this virus, if you will. And unfortunately, when they rape someone, a child or an adult, they pass. Remember, demons are the ultimate venereal disease, and condoms don't stop them. So, you know, when you're having sex with someone, you're having sex with everybody else they ever had sex with, to put it bluntly. Unless you prayed to break ungodly soul ties, which we've done over and over again with people over the years. But otherwise, you know, we've had some people who had sex with a prostitute many years earlier, and they came to us for ministry, and they were tormented by all of these sexual temptations, even though they were born again, even though they were trying their best. And we prayed and broke the link with that prostitute, because think of all the people that prostitute was having sex with over the years. And just because, you know, you're married now and everything, and you're a Christian, hallelujah, that doesn't mean that that stops unless you pray and ask that to be broken. So this is very, very dangerous, and I think this is partly why, you know, it's become so rampant within Masonry that in the last few years they've actually had to start up a group, a support group for victims of Masonic sexual abuse and Masonic ritual abuse. It's called SMART, S-M-A-R-T. I forget what it stands for. But a guy named Neil Brick is running it. No, that's kind of an unfortunate name for someone who's running an anti-Masonic support group. But anyhow, and this is why I believe we're having these things happen today, you know, where there's just every other day you hear about some poor child being either kidnapped or raped or some horrible thing, and it's all laid at the foot of this energy that the Illuminati, through Aleister Crowley, have released into the world. It's the age of the crowned and conquering child, the age of the fascinating child. It's the age of Horus. And see, Horus, in his incarnation, you notice that name there at the top, Re-Hur-Kuit. He is a hawk-headed god of vengeance. He's a god of war, a god of desolation, and a god of destruction. And interestingly enough, Crowley himself identified Horus, Re-Hur-Kuit rather, as being related to Islam. And that's very interesting, because there's a prophecy in the Book of the Law. I can't give you a chapter and verse on it. I know you're all disappointed. But I think it's in the 3rd chapter where Horus says this, Re-Hur-Kuit says this, I am the warrior lord of the 40s, and the 80s shall cower before me. Now, a lot of Thelemites, which I used to be, a Thelemite is someone who believes in Crowley. It's from the word thelema in Greek, which means will, because Crowley's cardinal rule was, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, love is the law, love under will. A lot of Thelemites believed Hitler was the warrior lord of the 40s. And Crowley himself, who was alive up until 1947, actually believed Hitler might be his new Messiah. But the 80s will cower before me. And the 1980s, of course, what did they see? The rise of militant Islam. Starting with the Ayatollah Khomeini in the late 70s with the hostage crisis and all of that. So there's two things happening here. There's this epidemic of fascination with children as sexual objects. You know, I mean, I'm even thinking like that John Benet Ramsey, that poor kid, you know, I mean, how they had her all dolled up like some little Cupid doll. You know, and what was she, 5 or 6 years old? I forget. I know she wasn't, you know, obviously old enough to be dressed like that. And you see that all the time now. We have sexualized our children. I mean, I was walking through the mall the other day. In fact, I don't mean to get off the topic, but in a way it isn't. And I saw a mother with this little, she couldn't have been more than 7, 8 years old, walking around in bright, shiny, satiny, whatever you call it, very, very short shorts, way too short. And on the back of the shorts was pink shorts, and the back was written, "I have hot pants." And this is like a 7 or 8 year old girl. You know, I mean, I don't know if the kid even knows what that means. She probably doesn't. You know, but still, I mean, and then you wonder why these guys, you know, get aroused like that. I think it's a two-edged sword. So anyhow, that's my little thing on that. But my point, I guess, is that this is one of the things the Illuminati has unleashed on the world. And now we go to the next step. Satanic abuse, MK Ultra, and Monarch. Excuse me. In the 20th century, we see the flowering of Crowley's magical efforts with child abuse, Masonic sexual abuse, satanic ritual abuse, and finally politico-satanic ritual abuse. And you know, what the heck is that? Well, let me give you some definitions. I think we all know what child abuse is. I don't need to go into the gory details. Masonic sexual abuse is child abuse done in a context either by a Mason or in an actual Masonic temple after hours. Please understand this. We're not alleging that this is being done by Masons in actual ritual context during their lodge meetings. This is being done behind the scenes, after hours, you know, or by, I mean, we've prayed for more than 1,000 people to be set free from demonic deception, demonic possession, or demonization, I should say. And I bet at least half of them were sexually molested by Masonic fathers or grandfathers. It's that bad. It's getting just, because frankly, there's a lot more Masons than there are Satanists out there. Satanic ritual abuse is something else. Satanic ritual abuse is when you have the abuse taking place in a context of satanic ritual where there's some kind of liturgy going on and deliberate attempts are made to terrify the child. Either the child is given hallucinogenic drugs, or the child is tortured, or both. The child is made to believe that they have been sold to the devil, and maybe they really have been sold by their parents to the devil. They're offered up on an altar to Satan. They have maybe even a baby killed and the blood poured over them. Imagine what a 6 or 7 year old kid would think of, especially if they're on powerful hallucinogenic drugs. And see, these last 3 things are done to deliberately fragment people, to create what are called, it used to be called multiple personality disorder, now it's called dissociative identity disorder. This is a psychological term. What it really means is that these people have become so traumatized their personality splits off into fragments, and different fragments are their own little personalities, and these different personalities take on the pain. Like, you know, we had one young lady who came to us, and she had a lot of issues, but there was one that had crystallized around apparently a very benign incident. She had just gotten to the age where she was starting to develop as a woman, and she was looking at herself in the mirror just to check out what was happening, you know, as I'm sure most young women do. And her dad and mom walked down the hall. She had her door shut and everything, nothing improper. And her mom said something and her dad laughed. And she thought that her dad was laughing at her. And that actually was so, for some reason, the kid must not have had a very strong ego, but it caused her to actually splinter. Just the thought of her dad laughing at her sexuality. And, you know, and that was the beginning. And then it just sort of grows, like kind of like a crystal. Have you ever seen those slow motion pictures on science shows about crystals grow? And we've dealt with people who have 55, 75, 100 or more personalities within them. And the beautiful thing is, the contrary to what psychology will tell you, contrary to even what a lot of supposed ministries that deal with this stuff will tell you, we have seen Yeshua, in the vast majority of cases, set them free in a matter of days. Literally days. It's not that big a deal for the master of the universe. Yeah, it's a big deal if you try to use psychology or if you try to use human methods. But all this is done for a reason. And it's believed, like I've had so many of these people come to me. Probably every week we have a phone call or an email from someone who's had this done to them. And so many of them, they have a part who is designed to be the bad guy. And even if it's a female person, there's still sometimes a bad girl, sometimes a bad guy who takes all the punishment. And often these people say, well, I'm demon-possessed, I'll never be saved. Even though the person has come to the altar and gotten saved, they have parts of themselves that aren't saved, quote unquote. And in fact, I even heard a psychiatrist, a Christian psychiatrist, tell me, well, what we do is we take all these parts and we lead each one of them through the sinner's prayer. And then I thought to myself, now the question that inquiring minds want to know at this point is, what happens if this person dies before you get through all 55 or 60 personalities? Do like some of them go to hell and some of them go to heaven? I mean, does the soul like go into 50 little cubes and some of the cubes go down to the nasty place and some of the little cubes go up to heaven? No, no, no. This is all utter nonsense. It's nothing that the Holy Spirit can't straighten out. And we just give Yahweh all the glory that we've been able to see that happen. But the point is, they believe that by doing this kind of fragmentation, the person will never be able to be born again. They believe that they will never be able to be of any use to anybody except the devil. The final level is what I call politico-satanic ritual abuse. This is ritual abuse that's sanctified by the government, that is authorized by the government. And to get into that, we have to get into what I call the trail of ultimate evil. Starting back almost 100 years ago, there was a group in England, still is as far as I know, called the Tavistock Institute. And this was a group that was studying pain and how you could use pain to manipulate the human mind through torture. Then we have a group in the last part of the 19th century called the Golden Dawn, which had both German and English members. And this served as a pipeline between German doctors who were doing this and English doctors who were doing this. And this ultimately developed, first of all, through Heinrich Himmler's Lebensborn project, and finally to the work of Dr. Joseph Mengele, whose picture you see up there on the screen. Some of you may have heard of Mengele. He's one of the most notorious figures of Nazi Germany. He was a medical doctor who was fascinated with pain and torture and also with genetic manipulation. He was trying to do a rudimentary form of cloning. And he was known as the Angel of Death because he tortured so many children that were in the concentration camps. I think he was at Auschwitz. Well, anyhow, this wonderful guy, along with many other Nazis, was allowed to get out of the country with help of what the OSS, which is the ancestor of our CIA, through a thing called Operation Paperclip, because they wanted his knowledge, just like they wanted the rocketry knowledge of Werner von Braun, even though Werner von Braun was a Nazi. And so many of these Nazi scientists came to America and ultimately to Canada, which is where Mengele was for a while. And this is the line of different, these are all CIA or OSS projects that were started. Project Chatter, Bluebird, and then finally MK Ultra. And Dr. Mengele and also another guy by the name of Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, who oddly enough was Jewish, which is a real interesting odd couple, they worked together on this MK Ultra thing. And what MK Ultra was, it operated out of Toronto, Canada, and what they did is they took Canadian orphans out of their orphanages and gave them LSD. Yeah, LSD was developed by the CIA for strategic purposes. It only later on crept its way out into the street. And anyway, they would put these kids in, you know, and I don't know if you've ever seen any kind of TV shows, or maybe you've done LSD. I hope none of you have. I have. And it could be either a really bizarre and very pleasant experience, but it could also be very horrible, depending on what's going on. It's basically psychosis. and they would torture these kids while they were on LSD. Little kids, 5-year-olds, 6-year-old, in ways I don't even want to go into. You know, electricity, needles, cattle prods, anything imaginable. And then they would try and see how much pain these kids could take and how many times they could get to fragment them. Well, ultimately, the Canadian government found out about this because they were doing this without the Canadian government knowing about it. These people from the CIA were up in Canada torturing Canadian children. And they tried to prosecute them, but they fled the country. So they sued the CIA. The Canadian government sued the CIA. It was a big stink, and they ended up settling out of court for an untold sum. And MK Ultra basically vanished into the underground. But it was replaced by a new outfit called the Monarch Program. And this was started out as Project Spellbinder and Project Often, and then finally it came up to be known as Marionette Programming or Imperial Programming. And this was going on in the 60s. And we have seen a lot of survivors come to us from this program. A lot of children of military officers. They no longer messed around with Canadians. They stayed in America. They either did orphans or they did children of of military people, or else they even did just children in orphanages in general. Hundreds of them, trying to create a super soldier, a super spy. And these are the levels of programming. And you'll see how this works. The most common form is alpha. And when you get this alpha programming, see, your mind, when you're tortured, your mind acquires a unique level of acuity, a unique sharpness. And most of these people have photographic memories. They are very intelligent, and they have a part of themselves that's like a super spy that will emerge whenever they need to do something like that. So the alpha programming will usually give them increased strength, increased stamina, the ability to go for long periods without sleep, and to basically do whatever they're told. That's true of all of these levels. So, for example, you might be tortured like this and have a system of these altars given to you over many years, and then as an adult, you're just, minding your own business, get married, have a family. And this could be either gender, but predominantly they're females, because females, see, they discovered very early on that women can take a whole lot more pain than men can. And so that way you'll hear this predominantly being women. Anyway, and so this woman might be sitting there one day, the phone rings, she picks up the phone, and they might say something like rosebud or whatever, and it clicks in. It's like a trigger. And we talk all about how this works in our book, Blood on the Doorpost, and they just turn off. And a whole new personality surfaces. They get dressed, they walk out, they get in the car and drive off and do something, come back, get back out of the car, get back into the house, and don't know they've ever even been gone. And, they might have done some very bizarre things, like be drug couriers for the CIA, or be sex slaves, or be spies, or any number of things, and they won't even remember it. The beta level, this is done mostly with females, this creates sexual programming that make them into sex slaves and drug mules. Then the delta level, you probably all heard of Delta Force. Well, they got that from this. These are people who are given this training. These are mostly men, but they're made into super soldiers. I mean, these guys have the ability to turn off pain. They have the ability, they have, again, the photographic memory ability, the incredible stamina. They're like about twice as strong as a normal person. But of course, they burn out after a few years because they're constantly revving on adrenaline. They just, fall over in a heap. But you can shoot these guys in the kneecap, and they'll keep after you. They'll actually be able to stop the blood from flowing out of a wound just by mental power. And of course, it's all demonic. But naturally, this would make really good soldiers, someone with that kind of ability. Then we have the theta level. This is programming for psychic abilities. And what does this mean? Well, it means like you can actually train these people to have psychic powers and to be able to mind read and even to be an assassin. I have one fellow that is a colleague of mine in the ministry who used to work for the United States Navy, I think, as a mental assassin. And he was trained like this. They actually put Partly it was electronic. They put stuff in his brain, chips, but they also trained him with drugs so that he could actually beam and kill someone over a large distance just by a mental thought. And then finally, we have the omega level of programming, which most of these people are given, and that's the self-destruct mode, which is kind of similar to what I was talking about a little while ago, like where if they are going to talk, all of a sudden they just stroke out or have a heart attack or have a brain hemorrhage or whatever. And that's built right into their human physiology, although it could also be demonic. So they're using these people out there. And there are different allegations. And again, you've got to take some of this with a grain of salt. There are people who claim they've been like the what they call a presidential model, which means a woman who's been trained to be a sex slave to a president. And they were like, you know, the sex slaves of Ronald Reagan or Gerald Ford or whatever, you know, and they'd come in and service them and then leave and wouldn't even remember it. And then what happens is with all of this is, see, the human mind can only take so much of this stuff, especially if you're born again. And so after, usually by the time a person is around 35 or 40 years old, this programming starts to fracture. And all of a sudden you start having these weird memories and these weird dreams. And, you know, that's usually when the person comes and seeks either psychiatric help or ministry. And that's when this stuff starts surfacing. Because usually by the time they're 40, they just can't hold the psychic stress anymore. Because it's like, I tell people, it's kind of like, have you ever tried to be in like a swimming pool and holding a beach ball underwater? It ain't easy, is it? And their mind just gets exhausted. And many of these people would tell us, I'm just exhausted all the time. Well, that's because so much of their mind's mental energy is taken up to keep all this straight. And after we prayed for them and Yeshua set them free, after about a week, they'd say, I can't believe how much energy I have. I'm sleeping through the night and I have all this energy. Well, that's because they aren't trying to keep 20 or 30 of these little people straight in their heads. You know, and the pain has been released because you don't have to hold, because all these little people, quote unquote, within them are holding huge amounts of torment and pain. And if you can get those people to give that to Yeshua, because he nailed all that to the cross. He took all of our torments, all of our hurts, all of our pains, and by his stripes we are healed. And that goes just for them as much as it goes for anybody else. So that's why we see the victory we do, if the people are willing to surrender it. Some people aren't willing to. Some people like their pain. And you know this, if you do any kind of ministry work or counseling, you know, there's some people they don't want to be better. You know, they just want to stay where they are and, you know, be what they are, and that's okay. That's fine. We had this one lady, lovely woman, just sweet as all get out. But we said, okay, you know, Yeshua's telling you now, it's time for you to let go of your children. That's what she called them, her children. Because there's about 20 or 30 of these little child parts inside of her. And she said, oh, I can't do that. I promised them we'd go on a picnic next weekend. And I'm like, you know, but that's programming, and it's also psychological dependency. Because the unknown is scary. Even if it's a better unknown, it's scary. So we need to be compassionate with these people, and we need to meet them where they are and tell them the scriptural truth and let them make those decisions. You know, I'm not judging such a person. I'm just saying, because they're coming out of a whole world of pain. But I am saying that if you're willing to open up and let Yeshua minister to you, this can be dealt with. Anyway, I already kind of mentioned all of this. The one interesting thing is that the key figures in the Monarch program, other than Mengele Cameron and Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, there's also a fellow who's alleged to be in it. He's a lieutenant colonel in the Army, or he was, I think he's now a general, called Michael Aquino. And he's also the head of the second most dangerous satanic organization in the world, the Temple of Set. And he was accused of child molestation while he was stationed at the Presidio in San Francisco, but the charges never stuck. But a lot of people have alleged that under the name of Mikey, that he has sexually molested them. But, you know, I'm just saying alleged. I'm not trying the guy without a trial. But I've met him. And he's a very, very powerful, very intelligent, and very dangerous and hateful man. I debated him on a TV show about 15 years ago. Let's see. No, not finally. We still got 2 things to go. Section 5. This is another part of the conspiracy web. UFOs, fallen angels, and Majesty 12. I've already talked about my early fascination with UFOs. I had it bad. I read everything I get my hands on. And I personally have had more than 100 sightings of UFOs, plus some possible first encounters. And, oops, gotta go to the next thing here. And what's interesting is that if you look at the history of all this, over the past century, many different occultists have professed involvement with UFOs. Indeed, some have founded religions based upon the Space Brothers, as they're called. See, there's a whole religion around this thing. Let me tell you a few true accounts from my own past. One thing that happened to me, and I don't know if it's a UFO, well, it is a UFO in the broadest sense of the word. I was up with my folks on vacation in Rhinelander, Wisconsin, at this beautiful lake, and it was night. And they'd gone off to dinner, and they left me at the cabin. I was maybe 13 or 14 years old. And I was sitting there just kind of enjoying. It was a beautiful night, August night, and all of a sudden, the trees started to blow. Just whoosh, you know, back and forth like that, but there was no wind. I could feel nothing in my hair, nothing touching my skin, even though I was sitting out there in a pair of swimming trunks on the dock. Then all of a sudden, the trees stopped. And what I noticed that kind of made the hair stand up on the back of my neck is that all the night sounds stopped. All the little crickets, all the little night people, you know, stopped chirping. And it was dead silence. And then all of a sudden, I heard this wind come over the lake like a gale, but the trees didn't move. Nothing moved. And I really felt like something bizarre is going on here. And I looked across the lake, because I could see the other side of the lake. And all of a sudden, coming up over the horizon, beautiful starry night, something was eclipsing the stars. Something black. And it rose and it looked like a head. And it came up higher and higher, and then there were shoulders. And it came up higher, and it was like this giant, vast body, totally black. And it filled the heavens. And still, nothing. The whole, everything, there, you know, no sounds from the little crickets or whatever. And it was like this thing just strode over the lake. And it's like I was standing like a little ant looking up at a person walking over my anthill. And then it was gone. Just 5 seconds. And then all of a sudden, all the little chirpy things started up again. Everything was normal. And I just felt like this, you know, I was like drenched in sweat. And I found out later that was a manifest. See, Wisconsin, if you ever want to have a creepy vacation, go to Wisconsin. Wisconsin has produced more bizarre people, including me, than any other state in the Union, even California, believe it or not. You know, what can you do about a state that's produced, you know, Robert Bloch, Ed Gein, and Jeffrey Dahmer? Think about it, you know. There's even a book called Wisconsin Death Trip about how all the weird things that, especially up in the north woods of Wisconsin, have happened, and that's where I was. I later found out that was a Thakwa, the windwalker. That's what the Native Americans call him. So that was definitely a UFO. It might not be, you know, like a nut and bolt flying saucer going like this, but it sure was an unidentified flying object. Now, another one, which is much more conventionally UFO, is we were down with this druid, Grand Master Druid in Arkansas. And how it worked is we would have to work for our learning and our room and board because he was feeding us and everything. It was like a communal kind of deal. And we'd work all morning, and in the afternoon, when it was hot, we'd have our classes, and then we'd have more classes after dinner. So we'd sit on this picnic bench, I'll never forget this as long as I live, on top of the mountain. There's just about 50 miles, let's see, it would have been about 50 miles northwest of Little Rock, and out in the country. And about half the nights we were there, during the middle of the lessons, this flying saucer would come over and just hover right over the mountain. And it looked like it was about maybe 200 feet over our heads. And you could actually look up and see windows in it and see forms moving around in it. And he just totally ignored it. You know, like, ho-hum, you know, yeah, we have a flying saucer over our heads. you know. And sometimes we'd actually look and we'd see little figures like going like this at us, like they were waving. And then it'd fly off. And none of us had the nerve to ask him because he just totally would not discuss it, you know. And none of us wanted to, you know, be the one to ask the question, you know. Night after night. I mean, I bet, you know, 30 or 40 times we'd see this UFO. And then when the class was over, and it was totally silent. And I remember to this day, it was white on top. It was kind of shaped like a cigar sort of thing. And then it had a red line around it, and then below that were these windows. And it was sort of like a flying hot dog, except don't think of the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile, please, that doesn't do it. And then it would just silently just fly off and never explained. Now, what do you make of that? You know? Then we have the Wauwatosa UFO. How many of you have heard of Wauwatosa? It's this suburb of Milwaukee. The name is an Indian word. It means firefly, oddly enough, if you're into trivia. Anyhow, my spirit guides, I taught about how I would always go into trance, and these spirit guides would talk. Well, one night, my spirit guides told us that I was supposed to report at midnight in January, this is in Milwaukee now, to a park in the middle of Wauwatosa. And they were very specific, right at such and such an address. I had to be there precisely at midnight and then wait for further instructions. And of course, we always learned we had to obey the spirit guides or else they'd whack us or something, you know. So I got in my little Subaru and drove out to this park, and it was colder than, you know, it was probably 20 below. And so I had my park on, and I get out of the car and I walked down to this, I think it was the Menominee River, I forget for sure, but anyhow, I was right near this river, which is all frozen over, of course, and totally deserted, nobody around, no traffic, big park, and all of a sudden this light comes down out of the sky. It's just this pure ball of light, and I'll show you a picture of what I mean in a moment, just pure light. And it came down out of the sky, and it sort of, you know, just sort of took me over, you know. And the next thing I know, I'm standing in this, like, room with this, like, big table with all of these people looking at me, like a panel, and I'm standing there. And some of them look perfectly human, and some of them look perfectly inhuman. And they're asking me questions. They're grilling me. And you'll never guess what they're asking me about. They're asking me about Masonry. They're testing to see how well I know the memory work I had to do in Masonry. And then after that was over, the next thing I know, I'm laying on my back in the middle of this park covered with snow. Now, that's not your typical UFO abduction experience by any means, but that's one thing. And then, of course, there's the UFO that paced us while we were driving out to Utah to get our temple endowments. We drove straight through the night. There were 3 of us in the car. A friend of ours was helping us drive, and then Sharon and I, and we drove straight through the night. And I'll tell you, you get out in those deserts, in Utah, in Nevada, and you see some strange things. And this thing was actually pacing us. You know, we'd be driving along on the interstate, and it'd be following us. You know, and I never did figure that one out. He said, I know Mormons are totally obsessed with UFOs. So anyway, the interesting thing is that many of these different UFO things have a religious context. This is the very first little gray man, quote unquote. This guy is known as Lam. And what happened is that Crowley did a ritual called the Alamantra working off of Central Park in New York in an apartment house. And he was trying to open a rip in the fabric of space and let beings of incredible power and evil in from another dimension. That's what the ostensible meaning of this was. And this being came through. And he sat and talked to Crowley, called himself Lam, L-A-M, and allowed Crowley to draw his picture. And this is the result. And we'll show you some pictures later on of the classic gray aliens. This was in 1918, which is about a generation before we ever got word about little gray aliens. So that's just one example. Brief historical overview. How many of you know that Christopher Columbus saw a UFO? John Wesley claimed to have seen one while he was out writing to an engagement where he was speaking. It's interesting that 4 years after Crowley brought forth the Book of the Law, we have the Tunguska explosion in Siberia. Any of you hear of that? Nobody knows to this day what it was. It was some huge object. Some people say it was a meteorite or a comet, but yet they have never found any meteoric fragments. It came down and it hit somewhere in Siberia near Tunguska, and the effect was like a nuclear explosion. I mean, trees were flattened for miles, and they didn't exactly understand nuclear radiation back in 1908 to the degree we do now, but everything that was around that area sickened and died, probably from radiation burns. And then even we have and this will illustrate how the context of these things is important. Many of you have probably heard of Our Lady of Fatima. She's one of the big Marian icons in Catholic theology. Well, there was actually a UFO experience with this, because it all depends on how you look at it. If you're a devout Catholic, you say, oh, this is the Virgin Mary, because here's this woman comes down in a ball of light dressed entirely in white. Now, if you were a UFO nut, you'd say, oh, it was a space sister. But if you're a Catholic, you'd say, oh, it's the Virgin Mary. What makes this thing especially interesting is that at one point, supposedly to prove her point, the lady, as she was called, it was raining. There were thousands of people standing around this grotto or wherever it was where this was all occurring, where she was appearing to these three little kids. And in Portugal, this was, Fatima, Portugal. And what's interesting is all of a sudden the clouds totally disappeared and the sun moved in the sky. And it started doing cartwheels. It started going like that in front of thousands of people. I mean, thousands of people reported this. And it was doing barrel rolls and cartwheels and did this for 5 or 10 minutes before it finally stopped and went back to its original position. Now, I don't have to tell you that obviously that wasn't really the sun. I mean, if the sun did that, I mean, it would have wiped out all life on Earth. But it was acting very much like a UFO. That's what UFOs do. They display what is called non-ballistic motion, which means they can be going very fast in one direction, and then they turn like that. And if a jet pilot tried to do that, he would be chunky salsa. The G-forces would destroy you. But these craft, beam, 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 like this at Mach 3, Mach 4, Mach 5 speeds, which means 5 times the speed of sound, which is about 3,500 miles an hour. So, that's the mysterious Fatima apparition. The birth of the UFO modern thing would be June 24, 1947, oddly enough the same year that Crowley died. Kenneth Arnold, who was a pilot, saw what he described as flying saucers. He coined the term skipping like this in front of Mount Rainier in Washington State as he was flying a small plane. Then, oddly enough, just a couple weeks later, in Roswell, New Mexico, near the Roswell Army Airfield, there was a crash of an alleged UFO. And this was at that time the site of the 509th Strategic Bomber Wing, and that was at that time the only bomber wing in the world that had nuclear weapons. They actually had atomic bombs on those planes, because this was right after World War II. Roswell has since then been ground zero for all subsequent UFO enthusiasm. That's me wearing my official Alien Resistance t-shirt from alienresistance.org. They're a great organization. They had me come down and speak at a UFO conference last July in Roswell. That's the actual hangar and the Roswell Army Air Base in which the wreckage of this craft, whatever it was taken. And you notice there it says restricted area, no pass, or something like that. And what's really weird is this is the first time anybody was allowed into this building in 10 years. This fellow that ran this conference, Guy Malone, he somehow had worked something out with the Air Force, and they opened up the whole hangar. Anybody could wander around wherever they want. Well, you know what was really weird? Is there's this guy there who was obviously a military security guy, you know, the haircut and everything, and he had this big sidearm, and he'd walk around and he'd say, don't go out of this hangar. You can walk around inside a hangar, walk outside of this hangar, I have to shoot you. We're all going, is this guy kidding or is he for real? You know, he keeps saying that to everybody. If you go outside this hangar, I'll have to shoot you. Well, that's the outside of the hangar. All that was out there was a couple of commercial jet transports like DHL or, you know, something or other. But this is the actual inside of the hangar. This is supposedly where they took the crash wreckage. And I'll tell you, there is some very, very nasty vibes in that room. Extremely evil vibes. I don't know from what, but very much strange. This is a huge hangar. That's me with Norm Franz, and the gentleman in the center is Jesse Marcel Jr. Jesse Marcel Sr., his dad, is the guy that actually helped find the wreckage, and he was like the press officer who released the information that a flying saucer had crashed outside of Roswell. But the Air Force made him change his story, and the next day it was supposedly a weather balloon. But the crash was such, the wreckage, they described it as tinfoil, but yet it was so rigid you couldn't break it. But yet it was flexible too. And it was unlike anything any of the military people had ever seen before. And it certainly wasn't a weather balloon, because these guys knew what a weather balloon looked like. Now, supposedly there was found, interestingly enough, this guy is a really sweet guy, the Jesse Marcel Jr. He watched his dad get really vilified by the Army and later on by the media because he broke this story. And so now he's become kind of a crusader, and he showed up at this is the anniversary of the Roswell crash, July 2nd, and he was walking around shaking hands and was kind enough to let us take his picture. But anyway, also, they supposedly found, and Jesse Marcel Sr. actually saw this, there was a piece of girder that had alien hieroglyphics on it. And if you see that thing that's up in the upper left-hand corner of the screen, that's actually what the alien hieroglyphs actually said. We don't know what they mean, of course, but that's what the writing was. And the funny thing was you could bend this material and it would snap back into shape. No matter what you did, it was like it was indestructible. But yet it crashed. And I just want to recommend this man's work to you because he's got some extraordinary stuff. David Flynn, I think his organization is called watcherssite.org or something like that. And anyway, he's done some amazing work proving that the Roswell crash was not an accident. Because there's a crop circle over in England that actually shows a classic gray alien holding a disc. And on the disc is ASCII code. You know what ASCII code is? It's the language of computers. It's the basic interchange between computers. You know, underneath the Windows and the DOS and the Mac OS or Linux or whatever, there's ASCII. And it's like every number has a numerical value, and it goes back basically to binary. And in this ASCII code is a message and a thing that he worked out to be longitude and latitude, and the longitude and latitude line up with Sidon in the Holy Land exactly with Roswell, right down to the degree. Fascinating book. Because, of course, don't forget you have Sidon over here, which is supposedly where the ancient space alien gods touched down. And then there's the Sidonian plain on Mars, spelled with a C, C-Y-D-O-N-I-A. And that's where that face on Mars was supposedly found, except NASA denies that it's a face. And the interesting thing about that plain on Mars is that there's structures, what appear to be pyramids. And the pyramids, although they're obviously eroded and you know they're far away, it's hard to tell what exactly they are, but they look like man-made structures, and they're laid out exactly the way the pyramids are laid out in the Cairo pyramids here on Earth. Coincidence or what? We'll talk more about Mars in a few minutes. Further adventures with the space people. On July 7, 1948, a huge UFO was sighted near Fort Knox. Oh, see, they're after our gold. And F-51 Mustang Squadron flew to intercept. Captain Thomas Mantell was giving chase to it. He couldn't keep up with it. And finally, he broke through some clouds and saw in the distance, and he said something to the effect of, you know, my God, it's enormous in size. That was the last thing he ever said. Something took his ship completely out, his aircraft. So he was the first casualty of the UFO. Then, reportedly, a treaty was cut because these things were buzzing the White House. There have been more than 500 sightings of UFOs buzzing the White House. And I'm sure some of you have probably seen the classic sci-fi movie, The Day the Earth Stood Still, where it was like from 1952 or something, and the saucer comes down and lands on a baseball diamond like 3 blocks from the White House. Well, something like that apparently really happened, except it was, I think, at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. That's the report I have. Because Eisenhower, who was then president, went in and signed a treaty with the aliens. And he had no choice, you know. And what was it? Well, we got advanced technology, you know. And in return, they got the right to experiment on our citizens. And they also got the right to build underground bases on our national soil. And we'll talk a little more about that in a minute. But so we actually supposedly have a treaty with them. And at that time, a group was organized, actually a few years before that, called Majesty 12, which was made up of very high-level men in the government to determine what to do with the knowledge of all this weird stuff going on with flying saucers and air spacecraft, etc. And there's a lot more to this, but essentially some of the people involved thought that we should release the information, that the American public could handle it. Other people thought it was a panic, it would cause a panic. And with a lot of shifty maneuvering, the secrecy group won out. And so this has been a secret ever since. Project Blue Book, for years, was done to supposedly have investigations by the Air Force of UFOs, but it was a joke. They never really seriously investigated anything. Here's some common varieties of UFOs. Up there on, I guess it's your left, you see a classic flying saucer shape from France, 1954. Next to it, you see what I call an amorphous shape, which means it's kind of hard to describe. It's sort of shapeless, but it's like 3 or 4 cylinders together. Down below, we have the triangular configuration of UFOs on the left from Belgium. Also, a lot of these have been seen in the Hudson River Valley. In fact, right now, at least a couple of years ago, that was the place to go to see UFOs. You can see them almost every night up in upper New York State. And then this is the kind of thing, this one on the lower right, that came after me in Wauwatosa by the river. Just a pure craft of light. That's from Las Vegas, 2004. No, I don't think it was a gambling casino float or anything. There's a cigar-shaped one. That's similar in a way to the one that we saw over Arkansas's mountains. There's a squadron of 3 saucers down there. One of the more interesting UFO photography things is in Gulf Breeze, Florida. Years ago, a fellow took multiple photographs on many different occasions of this rather odd Christmas tree-shaped ornament. Those 2 on the right are 2 examples. And they've baffled people because they don't appear to be faked. They've been examined by experts. It's hard to see on this thing, I'm sorry. I probably should get the video. You'll get a much better look at them, or DVD. But yet they're so clear in the fact that this guy keeps taking their, it's like whenever he's got a camera, they show up. You know, I mean, it's almost too perfect. But he's got dozens of photographs of this one odd flying saucer. And if you talk to people who live down there near Pensacola and the naval, I think there's a naval base or something right across the water from Pensacola, just UFO mecca. People say they can sit on their front porch at night, and about every other night they'll see a UFO fly by. See, they like to hang around Air Force bases and naval bases and stuff like that for reasons that we'll get into in a minute. Then we have the abduction phenomenon. These 2 people, it's a couple, Betty and Barney Hill. No, not Betty and Barney Rubble. They were a couple in 1961. This is the first recorded event of a UFO abduction. They were out in the country driving around in their car. All of a sudden their car died, and the next thing they knew it was 5 hours later. And then later on, they both discovered they had like odd marks on their bodies and were having strange headaches. And I think what ultimately happened is they went and had hypnosis, which I don't really recommend. But under hypnosis, they remembered being in a spacecraft type thing, laying on a bed, having probes stuck up various parts of their anatomy. And oddly enough, Betty Hill, who's still alive, I think, Barney Hill passed away a few years ago, I think of rectal cancer or something, but Betty's still alive, but she recalled under hypnosis seeing a star chart. And when she described it to the doctor and they showed it to astronomers, they said, well, this doesn't mean anything. This is nothing like we've ever seen. It's just a bunch of dots, you know. What was interesting is that years later, after they got the ability to use computers to realign stars, they determined that the stars were the way our solar system would look from the constellation Zeta Reticuli. So they remain to this day, you know, and it's been over 40 years, a pretty unshakable story. The experts have tried, but it's a pretty good, solid, because this had never happened before. Now, of course, we've had, you know, literally millions of people. The best figure I've heard, according to Dr. John Mack of Harvard University, is 4.5 million people believe they have been abducted by UFOs. Now, some of them may be a little, you know, but, you know, he's examined a sizable number of them and believes that indeed that may be the case. Another thing came along in the 1980s that really fueled the fire, and that's our first look at the classic gray alien. There's a horror novelist named Whitley Strieber, and he had written many books of questionable value, but all of a sudden he started getting abducted while he was in his cabin out in upper New York State. And he related this in the book Communion, and it became an international bestseller, and all of a sudden thousands of people were writing him and saying, this happened to me, exactly the same stuff, you know, thousands and thousands of people. And that was really the beginning of the modern day abductee movement. And since then, I mean, if you go to any bookstore, you'll find, like, you know, I think he's got more than a dozen books out. It's kind of a real cash cow for him. But I think if you go on his website, I think he's genuinely sincere. I think he's sincerely deceived. Interestingly enough, this guy was heavily into the occult, into the works of Theosophy and Ouspensky and Gurdjieff, all of whom were very high-level occult people from the last century. So naturally, someone like that is going to really be open to this kind of thing. Looking at the supposed characteristics of UFO abductions and comparing with stories of ritual abuse, are they actually two manifestations of the same experience? And that's an important question to ask, because there's a lot of similarities. In both cases, a person, whether as a child or as an adult, is taken against their will to some strange place, strapped down on something, and has scary stuff done to them, either physical torture or probing of private parts or whatever the case might be, being done by beings that are variously described. And what's interesting is, let me just show you this thing. Notice that face. Everybody who does this will tell you that if you encounter one of these beings, you are so filled with palpable dread that it's unlike anything they've ever experienced in their lives. That there's something about these beings, and they're alleged to communicate telepathically, that just paralyzes people with fear. Your mind just goes numb, and especially if you look in their eyes. And oddly enough, the same thing is said of this Lam guy I showed you that picture of a few minutes ago, that there are whole cults of Crowley followers that put pictures of Lam up and stare at it, and they claim their minds go blank, and they go off somewhere for hours, and then they come back and they don't know where they've been. And it's just a picture, you know. So whatever else these beings are, they exert an enormous amount of emotional and spiritual power. Anyway, the same thing is true in a lot of these. It's just like a different context. Instead of having people in some dark Gothic chapel, you know, cutting up babies and offering up blood to the devil, instead you have this, you know, Star Trek-esque science fiction setting with a table where people are strapped down, but still awful things are being done to them. And here's an important thing I want to highlight, because people ask, is this true? How much of this is real? How much of it is not? Nobody knows for sure, except, of course, the Almighty. But here's my point. Whether it's real or whether it's a demonic-induced illusion, it's just as terrifying. And it's the terror that's the open door. Because it says in the Word that Yahweh has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And so when you induce bone-grinding, mind-chilling terror in somebody, whether it's by a real event or by some demonically induced hallucination, you've created a huge open door, and that person needs ministry. And I don't know right now if it's our place to sit there and say, oh, well, you're just imagining things. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. Whatever they are, they need to have the spirit of fear cast out by the power of the Holy Spirit. So we try not to be that judgmental about this stuff. We meet people where they're at in all kinds of deliverance, whether it's with this or whether it's with regular demons. I hate to say regular demons, but, you know. I do think there's some kind of commonality. I think that some people that would never be duped into the Satanism are being drawn into this stuff instead. Now, this is the four main examples of UFOs. The one on the upper left is the classic gray alien. These are described as being 3 or 4 feet tall. They walk in a kind of a robot-like or monkey-like fashion. They smell of sulfur. Although they walk around for the most part naked, they don't appear to have any genitalia. They communicate by telepathy, and their eyes are really, really, really scary. They also don't appear to eat or reproduce. What they do is they stick their long, very long, tenderly fingers into either blood or chlorophyll and suck nutrients through their fingertips. That's the only way they eat. And they apparently do not do anything to eliminate it, which might explain why they smell so bad. Anyhow, and these are the ones that are usually involved in the UFO abductions. They're most often described as being there as workers or whatever. My take on this is that I'll get into that in a minute. The second type are called the Nordics or the blondes. And these are impossibly beautiful men and women, usually quite tall, not abnormally so, but you know, like supermodel height in the case of the women and 6'1" or 2" in the case of the men, that look like Nordic gods. They look totally like regular human beings, except much better looking than most of us. And these are supposedly from the constellation Lyra. I forgot to tell you, the gray guys are supposedly from the constellation Zeta Reticuli. Now, the Nordics are supposedly the good guys. They like us. They're fighting for us against the bad guys, if we're intended to believe all this, okay. Then the third variety, we're not really sure what these things are, if they're aliens or not. They're called the Men in Black. And they have nothing to do with that couple of crazy movies that came out the last few years with Will Smith and what's his name? Tommy Lee Jones. These are very strange dudes. They appear more normally to be Asian. They walk around wearing dark glasses, black suits, and Homburg hats. They drive very old black Cadillacs. And they smell of electricity, ozone, and sulfur. They walk around like robots. And their voices are metallic. And what they appear, their function appears to be, is that if someone starts talking about having a UFO experience of whatever sort, they will come around and try and intimidate the person and say, you don't want to do that, you might get in, you don't want to do that, you might get in trouble with the government, stuff like that. And they act very strange, and nobody really knows what they are. I mean, they could be robots, they could be aliens, they could be CIA agents on Quaaludes. I mean, nobody knows, but they don't normally walk around carrying ray guns like that either. Then the fourth kind, which is the really scary ones, are the reptilians. And no, that's not a photograph of a reptilian. I took that from Jurassic Park. But the reptilians are described as between 6.5 and 7 feet tall and very much looking like velociraptors, except they wear suits or they wear lab coats. They dress perfectly normal, except they have a tail, and they are scaly and green and tall and have a head like that. These guys are carnivorous. They prefer live food, i.e. human beings, and just like a reptile prefers live food. And supposedly they have the ability to transform themselves for brief periods into humanoid shapes. They can appear to be humans for brief periods, you know, a few hours, and then they have to go back to their normal shape, except for their eyes. Their eyes look reptilian, unless they wear special contact lenses or unless they wear dark glasses. And if you've read some of the stuff on the web, I mean, you hear all sorts of these things about allegedly that like the royal family are really reptiles, or President Bush Sr. is really a reptile, or, you know, someone alleges that they actually sat in George Bush's, not the older George Bush's office and watched him turn into a lizard. I mean, a 7-foot-tall lizard, and then eat a baby. So, you know, I mean, all I know is these things are out there. They've been cited on numerous occasions by numerous people, including me. They were even cited in a shopping mall in Salt Lake City after hours. Notice, Salt Lake City. There's all sorts of stuff that goes on underneath Salt Lake City that you don't want to know about. But this was in the basement of the Zion Cooperative Mercantile Exchange Mall. And a cleaning lady was cleaning, and all of a sudden she walked around a corner, and she said there was this 7-foot-tall lizard standing there in a lab coat with a clipboard. And he was as astonished to see her as she was to see him. She shrieked and ran one way, and he went "Pack!" and ran the other way. And and several people have alleged seeing reptiles in the deepest levels of the Mormon temple, because the Mormon temple goes in Salt Lake goes many layers deep, and that's another talk. But the point is, these reptilian types never really were run into until a certain key moment in UFO history. No, that's another talk. I'm sorry. That's a talk I'm going to give in an hour. I'm running out of, let's see, if it's Tuesday, it must be Belgium. Anyway, now what does the Bible say about all this? Well, the scriptures do warn us about signs in the heavens and end times deception. You know, for example, Luke 21:25, there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity, in the sun and moon waves roaring. Acts 2:19, I will show wonders in heaven above and signs in the earth beneath, blood, fire, and vapor of smoke. Now, none of that is actually talking about UFOs, but these are. For example, if you go to Ezekiel 1:13 through 18, there's that interesting passage about the cherubim that are wheels within wheels within wheels, and it seems to have something to do with a chariot, the Merkabah of Yahweh, and the wheels are actually living machines. It says there's a spirit within the wheel that directed the wheel whithersoever it should go. I mean, this is definitely science fiction stuff here, you know? I mean, and I think what it was the prophet was trying to describe something. It was essentially so far outside of his description, his experience, that it was just mind-blowing to him. Another example is the famous one about the flying roll in Ezekiel, Zechariah 5:1 through 11, and of course the woman in the ephah, and you know, that is carried away by the storks into the plains of Shinar and all this. I mean, this is really strange stuff, you know. And in both cases, I mean, you know, some people have made the observation, well, if you see a flying, what the word actually in Hebrew for roll is scroll. It's a flying scroll. But if you saw a scroll, if you saw a circular-shaped UFO, you would think it was a scroll if you were a Hebrew prophet who was a priest of the temple, like Ezekiel was. Oh, I guess it was the other one, it was Zechariah. Anyway, so there's the chariots of fire with Elijah. There's the strange locust scorpions in Revelations 9, 1 through 11. I mean, you know, there's a lot of these things, and they seem to either be manifestations of Yahweh's glory or his judgment. Others seem to be more of a wicked nature, like the woman in the ephah that's carried off by the women with stork wings and everything. So evidently there's both good and bad UFOs in the scriptures. Now, what about the gospel of these beings? Because anytime you have something like this happen, you've got to look at the spiritual dimensions of it. What are these beings saying? Well, there's an interesting story that Walter Martin used to tell, except now they've censored it off of his tapes, but I remember him saying it because I was sitting in the audience. He talked about how there was a Baptist preacher who was out driving around in the deserts of Arizona late one night coming back from a sick call. And he saw this brilliant light come down over the hill by the road, and he thought it was maybe a crashing airplane. And so he pulled his car over the side of the road, got out, climbed over the hill, and there was a UFO. And there was this little guy in a spacesuit doing something to it, like he was fixing a flat or something, you know. And so being a good Baptist, he grabbed his Bible, ran down the hill, and he's going to witness to the guy. You know, so he walks up to this little guy, and the alien turns and looks at him. And he walks up to him, and they're staring face to face at each other. And he says, "Brother, do you worship Jesus?" And the alien smiles and says, "Of course, doesn't everybody?" And then he walked back and finished his stuff and flew off. Now, you know, I don't know what you make of that. I mean, if it me, I would have asked a different question. But, you know, or I would have asked more questions or something. But I think the guy was so floored, A, that the thing spoke English, and B, that he said, "Oh, yes, we worship Jesus, doesn't everybody?" You know, obviously, you know, everybody doesn't, at least on this planet. But other than that, that's the only example I've ever found of that. Most of the time when you get into a spiritual discussion with these beings or their agents, because most of the time what you have is you have people channeling these aliens. Like the infamous Bo and Peep, you know, Marshall Hepplewhite, the Heaven's Gate people that suicided themselves a few years ago, or the Raelians, you know, the people who were supposedly going to give us clones a couple of winters ago. They're usually just speaking as mouthpieces for the aliens. And the aliens always tell the same thing. First of all, they say, well, you know, Jesus was a space brother. Jesus isn't really God. He's just an alien from another planet who came down here with powers and abilities far beyond those of mortal men, to help us out and to teach us the way and to teach us how to love one another. And that is all about love. And okay, love is nice, you know, but it doesn't get you to heaven. Amen? And so many of these, they all, for instance, they're all big on the environment. They want to help save the whales and save the planet. And they basically are dissing the Bible, and they're essentially saying there's no heaven, there's no hell. You know, there's no worry about salvation. All you have to do is be nice and love one another and hug a whale and hug a tree, and everything will be wonderful. And us space brothers are going to come down here someday soon and fix everything. We're going to fix the environment. We're going to fix all these problems. We're going to get rid of nuclear weapons, and we're going to straighten the whole planet off, and then everybody will live happily ever after. Heaven right here on earth. In fact, that's one of the things the Raelians claim. They're claiming that they're going to be able to offer us immortality through cloning. You know, if they're going to have this giant computer that when you're ready to die, you just have a clone made of yourself when you're 20 years old, you know, prime of life, and they download your brain into this supercomputer, and then when your old body kicks off, they just upload that same data into the new brain, and then there's a brand new Bill Schnoebelen walking around who can live for another 60 years or whatever, and they do the same thing all over again. So they all say there's no need for a resurrection, there's no need for hell, there's not even any death. You know, very much New Age stuff. They also, there's a more sinister side to this, because many of these guys will teach you that people who don't cooperate with this new alien gospel program may somehow be eliminated. They may, you know, I know this one person said that the space aliens said that if you don't cooperate and be peaceful and stop being one of these rotten fundamentalist killjoy types, that you will be beamed off this world and transferred to the purifying violet flame of Sirius. Now, Sirius is a very important star, both in UFO lore and also in the occult. But the point is here is that they're saying if you don't get with the program, you're going to be destroyed. Either we're going to take you out and shoot you or guillotine you, or else we're going to consign you to the central sun of Sirius, where the violet flame will purify you, so that in your next incarnation you'll be much more pliant. So we could be talking pogroms here. We could be talking a fake rapture. You know, I mean, think about that. What would happen? I think my friend Norton Frams taught about this. If all of a sudden millions of people vanish from the earth, and you're a Bible-believing believer here, and you're not gone, that would be kind of demoralizing, wouldn't it? You know, whatever you believe about the rapture, whether you're pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib. I mean, you know, and I agree with Stan as it happens about that, but I'm just saying it would be very bizarre, and yet they're already preparing. Some of these UFO cult leaders are preparing for that very thing. Well, what's actually happening here? Well, first of all, according to the Bible, there's 7 kinds of beings here on earth. There's Yahweh, who of course is the Almighty God. There are higher level celestial beings, you know, what are spoken of in various parts of the Bible: seraphim, cherubim, thrones, dominions, principalities, powers, Ephesians 6:12. And of course, some of them are good and some of them are fallen. Then there's angels, both elect angels that are good and evil angels. Then there's humans. Then there's these mysterious giants that are spoken of in Genesis 6, also called Nephilim. Then there's demons, and then finally, of course, there's the animal kingdom. Now, some of you might be surprised we have 2 separate categories for angels and demons, because some people believe, erroneously I think, that demons are fallen angels. I don't think the Bible supports that. I think that's something that somehow developed over the years in the Dark Ages, because I've encountered demons and I've encountered fallen angels. And both BC and AD, if you understand my meaning. And there's as much difference between a fallen angel as a demon as there's between me and a mosquito. Fallen angels are awesome beings. And demons are not. Demons are like insects, basically, except they're spiritual. I'm not saying they're really little thing buzzing around. And remember, nowhere in the scriptures do we ever hear of someone being possessed with a fallen angel. They're always possessed with a devil or a demon, whatever. So I believe that angels that are fallen are just that, fallen angels. They're not demons. Well, then the question becomes, well, where do the demons come from? Well, here's what I believe. I've already told you the Jewish thing on this. The demons are the result of Lilith and her temper tantrum outside the Garden of Eden. I personally favor another view, which is that these giants and mighty men of renown, because remember, the flood was the primary judgment for that sin, for the sin of the angels coming down in Genesis 6 and marrying the daughters of men, the B'nai Elohim, the sons of God coming down and marrying the daughters of men. And so there were all kinds of the offspring, these Nephilim, these mighty men of renown, and I think those are 2 different types of people, or semi-people. And when they were wiped out in the flood, because they were half angel, what's the deal? Well, they survived as demons. Their bodies were destroyed, but their spirits live on as demons. And that's personally my theory on demons, but it's not, obviously, it's not like the canon of Scripture or anything, and I'm willing to be shown the error of my ways if I'm wrong, but I believe that's it, just based on, you know, understanding how these things work. So anyway, there are all these different kinds of beings. Now, Satan, from the beginning, his plan has been to mix up those different categories of beings, to confuse them. Remember how over and over again, if you read especially like in the King James Bible, it talks about, over and over again in the Torah, it will say, do not do such and such. This is confusion. And Yahweh very clearly states, even we're not supposed to blend seeds. We're not supposed to have hybrid seeds. And then now look what we're doing today with all this genetically modified, frankenfood and everything. Anyway, what he wants to do is corrupt human DNA any way he can. Now, originally he wanted to do that back in Genesis 6 because he heard what Yahweh promised Adam and Eve in the garden, the original messianic prophecy, that Eve's seed, notice that, by the way, since when does a woman have seed, right? But that Eve's seed would crush the head of the serpent. Well, he was going to try and checkmate that by introducing, fallen angel, if you will, DNA, for lack of a better word, into the human strain. Well, that's why Yahweh ended up having to wipe out everything. The Bnei Elohim and the daughters of men. But how did Satan and his fallen angels do this? How did they accomplish this? Well, think about it. It says in the scriptures that angels in heaven neither marry nor are given in marriage. Angels normally are not able to marry. They don't have to. They're immortal. The only reason we have to be able to reproduce and have babies is because we don't live forever. I mean, if we all lived forever, if we had babies, the earth would be a mess. There'd be, 500 bazillion people here. So it's not in the nature of angels to be able to reproduce. So what they have to do is they have to make a conscious decision to spurn the dictates of the Almighty and come down here and consume human blood. That enables them to have the ability to reproduce. And what's going on here is that since this whole UFO thing got started in the 40s, a lot of these UFO abductees are reporting that they're like becoming enlightened. They're reporting strange changes in consciousness. Many believe the space people are saving them. There's increasing reports of women saying that lizards are coming and having sex with them at night and that they love it, because lizards are a whole lot better in bed than the typical Joe Schmo on the street, I don't know. And many welcome alien possession, which is what we mean by a walk-in. When somebody literally walks in and takes over a person, we would call it possession. But they believe, because of this wonderful space alien, that, I'm sharing consciousness with a space alien. And he's just like Mr. Spock. He's teaching me all these wonderful things. Yeah, right, Anyhow, these Bnei Elohim, these sons of God, are seeking blood, elements of human reproduction, ova, sperm, etc., water, and electricity. Now, what's interesting is there's an ancient legend. Well, when I say ancient, it's like 1,000 years old, about the incubus and the succubus. And what the legend says is that a succubus, a female spirit, will come to a man in their sleep and cause that man to have a nocturnal emission. And they will, in other words, it's like a sexual vampirism thing. Then they'll take the man's seminal fluid, turn themselves into an incubus, which is a male sexual demon, and then go and find another woman who's sleeping somewhere and impregnate that woman with the seed they've just stolen from the man, but they've transmuted it alchemically within themselves. Now, that's actually, a very common legend you see in the Middle Ages. I'm not saying it happens, but I'm saying I think it's like a metaphor for what's going on here. Is that these fallen angelic beings, through, I think, their little gray flunkies, are harvesting human reproductive materials and using them in genetic experiments. They're also very interested in blood, because without the blood, they can't transform themselves into beings that are capable of reproducing themselves. And let me tell you something. These angels, once they fall, they really like you women. They look at you and there's a hottie. I'm going to go get her. You know, they are totally attracted to the members of the female gender, and Satan lays this on them. Now, why from Jupiter? Well, Jupiter is, of course, the king of the gods, biggest planet in the heavens, and all of these angels, in terms of occult theory, these fallen angels report coming from the Jupiter zone, which is a term that's used within ceremonial magic. Now remember also, what's the more ancient word for Jupiter in the Babylonian Sumerian tongue? Jupiter, is called Marduk. Before Marduk, he was called Nimrod. So we're back to Nimrod again. And plus, it's also interesting how it talks about in the book of Acts. Remember, great is the Diana of the Ephesians deal. And it says how this rock, this image fell down from Jupiter, and they built this temple around it. See, because Jupiter is the largest planet in our solar system, it's a representative of the rival of the Son of Righteousness, Yeshua the Messiah. Just like Jupiter is a potential rival to the sun. And I don't know if any of you have seen that movie 2010. It's like the sequel to 2001. Well, in it, have any of you seen 2001? I guess not. Oh well. Anyhow, well, briefly, they go out to find alien life in this second movie. They're following this giant monolith, which looks sort of like a Hershey bar floating in space. It's completely black, and it's geometrically perfect. Well, while they're out there, they're warned to get back away from Jupiter to Earth. I'm condensing like 2 movies into a 5-minute story, hopefully. What happens is all of a sudden thousands of these little monoliths start appearing on the surface of Jupiter. And it looks like they're sucking, because remember, Jupiter is a gas giant. It's a big like glob of gelatinous, gaseous gunk, that's like 1,000,000 times the size of the Earth. And anyway, it starts sucking it into itself. And then all of a sudden, just when the spaceship gets just out of harm's way, it detonates, it implodes, and then it explodes, and it becomes a star. And all of a sudden, there's a new star in the heavens. And it's like, this is in the movie, they make it, this is going to bring world peace, because there's 2 suns, and never will there be night. And so everybody can grow more crops, because they'll be able to grow crops day and night. And isn't this wonderful? And I'm thinking, this doesn't even make a lot of sense, but anyhow. The point is that at the end they have this little epilogue where the guy says, our children will grow up never knowing a time when there was only one sun in the sky. And plus, at the same time, these aliens are causing life to form on the moon of Jupiter, Europa. So there's a whole new world coming into being. What they don't tell you in the movie is that in the book, 2010 by Arthur C. Clarke, they name the sun Lucifer because it's another sun. It's the light bearer, and it's a rival to the Son of Righteousness. So, I get goose shivers just talking about that. I mean, because this is how subtle these people are. I mean, they move on levels upon levels upon levels. But ultimately, it all boils down to the fact that Jupiter is a symbol of Nimrod. He's the ultimate idol because he's the king of the gods. Whether he's called Zeus or whether he's called Jupiter or whether he's called Thor or whatever, Now, let's talk about a couple of other things. Why do they want our water? Well, some people say it's because they want to take the water back like to Mars or somewhere and repopulate the planet, because it's a dead desert world. I personally believe it's because, do you realize how much water there is in the universe? I mean, there's dark matter out there bigger than like our entire galaxy, and some astronomers believe it's just frozen water. I mean, there's so much water out there, I mean, you can't even, it's incalculable. But there's something very special about our water. I'm not, because it's Perrier, no, I'm not talking about that. When Yeshua died on the cross, what happened? He shed his blood for us. And his blood, yeah, blood and water, poured out of his heart, John tells us. And his blood is the blood of Yahweh. It says that right in the book of Acts. It's divine blood. Even though he has human DNA too, he's fully divine and fully human. That's what our creeds tell us, and I believe that. But here's the point. If it's the blood of Yahweh, nothing can stop it. And it went into the ground, it went into the earth, and it percolated through the entire planet. And this is actually a secret doctrine, that the blood of the Messiah went through all the water on earth contains it. Because it is so powerful that it went through everything, just like, if you will, an acid that can eat through anything. And so the seas are full of it, the oceans are full of it, the lakes are full of it. Everything is permeated with the saving power of the blood of Yeshua. Now here's the deal. Both the Satanists and the fallen angels know, or they're told, they cannot be redeemed. I was told that as a Satanist, that I could not be redeemed, that I had committed, by selling my soul to the devil, I had committed the unpardonable sin. We know that's a lie. I'm not sure, on the other hand, that fallen angels can be redeemed. But that's beyond the scope of this talk. The point is that these people are so desperate for what they perceive as the power of the blood of Yeshua, that they will settle for the water that has his blood in it. And they're actually taking our water and bathing in it and drinking in it in a desperate hope to acquire some of what they think of as the magical virtue that is within it. So that's why they don't go to Venus to get water. They don't go to other planets to get water. That's why supposedly they travel all the way from Zeta Reticuli, which is hundreds of light years away, just to get our water, is because it's not just water. They believe it has the blood of Yeshua in it. I'm not saying that it really has any magical properties. I'm just saying that's what they believe. But I do believe that the power of the blood of Yeshua has covered this planet. We do not yet understand the full extent, we won't until a millennium, of what that blood is waiting in the soil, in the water, in the plants, in everything. And when he finally cracks the skies and comes, something wonderful is going to happen. Not just to us, but to the whole earth. But that's, again, something else. Now, they also seem to like electricity. Quite often you'll find them behind power blackouts. And I think it might be because maybe they need a jump for their ship or something else. But remember one interesting thing. I heard a very interesting preaching years ago, way back when I was a young believer, where this preacher was saying that basically, and he wasn't saying this in a Luddite way, like, oh, we shouldn't use electricity, but he was saying electricity is of the devil. Because what did Yeshua say? He say, I saw Satan fall like what? Lightning from heaven. And he's the prince of the power of the air, is he not? And what travels through the air? Electricity, lightning. And I think there's some sort of connection there. This is the one part of the equation I haven't fully figured out. But I do believe there is a reason why they are constantly sucking our electricity as well. And I think it goes beyond just they need to jumpstart their flying saucers or something. Okay. Let me think. There's one other thing I wanted to talk about. I think about that. Oh, that's right. I had to explain one other thing. Talking about the different varieties of these beings and how they all fit together. I was going to say that and I forgot to. A critical thing to understand in all this is the fact that these are different, they all generate from fallen angels, those four categories I showed you a few minutes ago. And here's how I think it fits together. When an angel makes the decision to fall, what do? They cut themselves off from the source of all beauty, all grace, all power. They have really nothing left to sustain them except their own evil and whatever limited power, and I do mean limited, they get from the devil. And so when they first are newly fallen, so to speak, I think that's when you get these Nordic type aliens that are so gorgeous, that are so handsome and beautiful, because that's what angels look like. Now, I think over a period of time, these aliens start to deteriorate a little bit, because again, they have no source of creativity and beauty and grace anymore. And it's almost like, the portrait of Dorian Gray, where they start looking kind of nasty looking. And ultimately, just like we someday will resemble Yeshua, they start resembling their new father, the ancient serpent, the dragon, Satan. And so gradually they begin to transform into these reptilians, until finally, as they get to being a full-fledged fallen angel, if you will, then they just basically look like these reptilians. And what's extraordinary about this is that at that point, they are totally given over to evil. Now, Thomas Aquinas, who was a Catholic theologian, but I think he got this one right, he said something very interesting in his study of angelology. He said that because angels exist in the presence of Yahweh, they're in the presence of what Catholics call the beatific vision, and I have no problem with using that word. It just means they are in a state of constant exposure to the most glorious, beautiful being in the universe. And they are infused with intellect. What that means is anything they want to know, Yahweh just downloads it and they know it. They have a crystal clear intellect, a crystal clear will, very much like what Adam had before the fall, except not the intellect. And what Aquinas suggested is that because of the invincibility of the angelic intellect and the angelic will, once they make that conscious decision to fall, to sin, there's no repentance. They're not like us. We're clouded. Our intellects, we come into this world clouded. We can't really none of us, I don't think, have ever seen the Father. Angels live in His presence. And to live in that presence and to turn your back on it requires a profound level of insanity from which there would be no turning back. So that's why as beautiful and glorious as angels are, and believe me, a couple times I've seen angels, and anyhow, they're awesome, to use the word that's overused nowadays. But once they turn, once they fall, it's like, forget it. Because there's no turning back. There's no turning back. And then we have the grays. Where do they come from? Well, if any of you have done any work with gardening, with roses, or even maybe with cattle, animal husbandry, you know that when you breed animals to produce a new hybrid, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you get a really great cow or a really great horse or whatever, and sometimes you get a real dud. Sometimes you might even get kind of like an abomination. You get something with two heads or, that only lives like a few hours. Well, I believe that these gray aliens What they are is they are genetic mistakes. They're mules in the sense that they cannot reproduce, and they are limited in intellect. They're basically like drones or clones. They're like human-esque living robots that do the bidding of the Nordics and the Draconians, the reptilians. And that's why they're usually seen in lowly, working, or at best, medical tech type roles. They're never seen like leading or giving orders or things like that. So that's what I believe they are. But I do believe that their masters have infused them with an enormous amount of whatever you want to call it that produces this fear. They do seem to have telepathic ability, and they seem to have the ability to broadcast a profound level of fear. And the only reason that we even know about these reptilians is that they started welching on their agreement with the U.S. government about 25, 30 years ago. And what happened is the U.S. government found out they were taking a whole lot more people, abducting them and maybe even never bringing them back than they had originally led us to believe. And plus they weren't being as forthcoming with their technology as they had originally promised. Again, Satan's always a welcher. So there were these enormous underground bases. And the U.S. government decided to go in there and kick them out. And this caused a literal underground war to take place in the southwestern United States around the Four Corners region. And this is when, before this, nobody really knew what these reptilians looked like. And that's when we first saw them. And since that time, they've been more commonly witnessed. Several people that used to work in these underground bases have come forward and said, yes, I've seen them, wearing suits, wearing lab coats, dressed perfectly normally, except they're 6.5, 7 feet tall, and they have the head of a lizard and a tail. And they're green, and they eat people. Oddly enough, very much like, I don't know if any of you remember that old miniseries V. They wore masks that made them look human. They pulled off the mask underneath. They're cannibalistic lizards. Gee, I wondered who made that movie. See, again, they're preparing us. Hollywood is preparing us. So anyway, because of that, now we know these things are out there. And, many people reported seeing them. Many people, I mentioned this earlier, many people are even reporting they're making love to them, for heaven's sakes. So it's getting really weird out there. And again, this is part of the deception, because it's anything that will keep people from trusting in the Messiah. Instead, they're trusting in the Space Brothers. It's a distraction. But it's a powerful one, because, see, the gospel that these aliens present doesn't ask anything in return. You don't have to follow any rules. You don't have any 10 commandments. All you have to do is love everybody. Well, that's a lot more appealing than what Yeshua offers, in theory, unless you're touched by the Holy Spirit, and then you see the truth. So, anyhow, we got to get to the final level of this. It's obvious today that a massive deception is being foisted upon us from several fronts. Whether it's the fact that our kids are being abused, whether it's the fact that, we're got all this occult stuff running every which way but loose. Because let's face it, there's levels of occultism in this nation that have never been seen in our history. And don't get me wrong, I'm not one of these people that think, America has always been a Christian country. No, it really hasn't, folks. Right at the dawn of our country's history, the Pilgrims landed, Roger Williams landed, but at the same time, the Rosicrucian community at Ephrata, Pennsylvania was started. I visited that place on my last Prophecy Club tour. It's still standing to this day. They call it the Ephrata Cloister, and they won't tell anybody this, but it was the first community in the New World. It goes back to the 1600s. So right from the very start, just a few years after Jamestown, it's like Esau and Jacob struggling in the womb. The forces of the occult Bacon's New Atlantis, the idea that he wanted to turn America into an occult Disneyland. And then on the other hand, people like the Puritans, and the Pilgrims that wanted to make this country a place of religious freedom where biblical principles could hold sway. So this has been going on from the very first. But right now it's getting really much more spectacular. I mean, as I'm fond of saying, when I started getting into the occult in the late 60s, you could count the books on the occult that were available in this country on the fingers of both hands. Now you go into a big bookstore like Barnes & Noble and the shelves are just creaking under the weight. I mean, 6, 8, 10, 12 shelves full of books on witchcraft and the occult. So a massive deception is being foisted upon us on several fronts. But if you were the devil, what would you want to do to really weaken the body of Messiah? Let's talk about the Antichrist for a moment. The Bible talks about the spirit of Antichrist. And you need to understand that Antichrist does not necessarily mean against Yeshua. The word anti in Greek can also mean instead of. So in other words, it can mean a being who wants to take the place of Christ, not necessarily fight him. And I'm fond of telling people that, if you think the Antichrist is going to be like Adolf Hitler or Saddam Hussein or Stalin or some other weirdo like that, no. And I'm not saying this in any disrespect, he's going to be someone like John Paul II. Someone who's got all the charisma in the world, all the charm in the world, who could, charm the paint right off the side of a barn. He's going to be handsome. He's not going to be some funny-looking guy with a mustache. And he's going to have the spiritual power to deceive the world. So he's going to be a replacement. And Yeshua warned us of many false Christs. There's not only just going to be one. There have been ones in the past. There will be ones in the future. Indeed, the whole essence of many counterfeit cults and the New Age is that they offer different Christs. Whether it's Lord Maitreya, who's one of the darlings of the New Age movement, or whether it's Reverend Moon, who thinks he's the Messiah, he thinks he's the new Christ, or whether it's, Krishnamurti or some other bizarre individual. They're all over the place. Now, I want to read to you a passage from 1 John, which is very important in all of this. In 1 John 2, 22, 23, we read this: "Who is a liar, but he that denieth that Jesus is the Christ? He is Antichrist, that denieth the Father and the Son. Whosoever denieth the Son, the same hath not the Father. But he that acknowledgeth the Son hath the Father also." And then the very key passage in 1 John 4:1. "Beloved, believe not every spirit, but try the spirits, whether they are of God. Because many false prophets are gone out into the world. Hereby know ye the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesseth that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is of God. And every spirit that confesseth not that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is not of God. And this is that spirit of Antichrist, whereof you have heard that it should come, and even now it is in the world." And again, we have this idea here of false scriptures. According to the criteria of 1 John, these are Antichrist scriptures. The Book of Mormon, the Jehovah's Witnesses New World Translation. But now let me ask you something. What would you do with a Bible that denied the virgin birth? Here's two translations. Luke 2:33. Compare your own scriptures. "The child's father and mother marvel at what was said about him." The second translation says, "And Joseph and his mother marvel at those things that were spoken of him." Now there's a huge difference there, isn't there? Is Joseph the father of Yeshua? No. Stepfather, yes. Father, no. How about this? Casting doubt on Yeshua's sonship. Indeed, Herod and Pontius Pilate met together with the Gentiles and the people of Israel in this city to conspire against your holy servant Jesus, whom you anointed. Whereas the second passage says this, for of a truth against thy holy child Jesus. See, one passage calls him a holy servant. The other passage calls him the holy child of Yahweh. Now that's a huge difference again, because hopefully we're all servants of the Almighty. But there's only one child of Yahweh in the ultimate sense of the word. Now how about throwing out a verse altogether? In 1 John 5:7 in the King James Bible we read this, for there are three that bear record in heaven, the Father, the Word, and the Holy Ghost, and these three are one. That's great. What's funny is I'll never forget the time I was teaching a class at a church on Mercer Island in Washington, and we were doing a thing on Jehovah's Witness, and I was trying to talk about the Trinity, and I said, turn to your Bibles to 1 John 5:7. And 2 or 3 people in the thing said, that's not in my Bible. And I said, well, what Bible do you have? I'm not telling you. But they said, okay, this is weird. This verse is not in my Bible. What kind of chutzpah, to use the original Yiddish, does it take to pull a verse out of the Word of God? How about redemption without blood? In this Bible version we're talking about, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins, versus in whom we have redemption through His blood, even the forgiveness of sins. You see, if you take away the blood of Jesus, you're sunk. There's nothing. There's nothing that can save us but the blood. And yet here it's removed. How about the ability to discerning spirits? Oh, this one is subtle. This one is a goodie. Every spirit that acknowledges that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God. But every spirit that does not acknowledge Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist. Now, notice how short that passage is compared to the one underneath it. Hereby know ye the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesseth that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is of God. And every spirit that confesseth not that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is not of God, and this is that spirit of Antichrist. Now, what's the difference? You might say, well, this is nitpicking, but look at it. First of all, it acknowledges in the one. Every New Age clown on earth acknowledges Jesus. I remember when I was in the Church Universal and Triumphant, which is the world's only right-wing New Age group that I know of, Elizabeth Clare Prophet, they have this huge picture of Jesus up there in the front of their church. Of course, right next to him is a huge picture of the Count de Saint Germain. But everybody loves Jesus. Oh, Jesus is so popular, whether he's a space alien or whether he's ascended master, or like the Jehovah's Witnesses, he's the Archangel Michael, or whether, like, the Mormons believe he's, an archangel or something or other. I mean, everybody acknowledges Jesus. But notice this, confesseth that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh. That's present tense. Every person who ever walked the earth has come in the flesh. Millions of people have come in the flesh, past tense. But only one, after 2,000 years, still is come in the flesh, and that's Yeshua. So there's two big problems here. One is, it's a world of difference to confess Yeshua than to acknowledge him. And number two, it's saying that if you do not confess that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh, and what's funny is you can never get a Mormon, a Jehovah's Witness, any of these cult-type people to say that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh. They won't say it. They can't even read it out of their scriptures because the devil won't let them. And yet here it's been removed. It's been totally emasculated. Who is manifest in the flesh? It says here, he appeared in the body, was vindicated by the Spirit, blah, 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 Whereas on the other passages, without controversy, great is the mystery of godliness. God was manifest in the flesh. Forget the indefinite pronoun. God was, that's a huge thing. I mean, again, everybody was manifest in the flesh. Everybody sitting here in this room tonight was manifest in the flesh. I was manifest in the flesh. Big deal. The fact that God was manifest in the flesh is an enormous scriptural truth that has been totally watered down by this. Now, the question becomes, what on earth Bible translation are we talking about here? Are we the one drawn from the same corrupt manuscript as the Jehovah's Witness Bible? Believe it or not, that's the case. This is a translation that's been translated by men who deny that we have the very word of Yahweh today. One translated according to rules set down by an unsaved German rationalist named Griesbach and two apostate Episcopalian clergymen, Westcott and Hort. What Bible could this be? Well, it's one of the best-selling modern Bibles today. It's the NIV. And it is right now, I think, the best-selling Bible out there other than the King James. But it's based upon principles of Antichrist. It's hung by its own words. Now that's kind of scary. What do you think the Master's telling us here? In Matthew 5:18, "For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law till all things be fulfilled." What's that mean exactly? Well, you've got to realize a jot is a reference to the the Hebrew letter Yud, which is the tiniest letter in the Hebrew alphabet. It basically looks like a fly speck if you look at it from any distance. And a tittle is a diacritical mark, a little tiny dot that they put under the text. So what he's saying is, even the teeniest, weediest parts of the Torah will not pass from the Torah till all things be fulfilled. And then we have Matthew 24:35. "Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my word shall not pass away." Now think about that. That means that this whole universe is going to go kerflooey someday. And yet the Bible is going to still be here. And notice he says words, not word. We're not talking about people say, "Oh, I've got the word here. You know, this is the word," and they're pounding on their Bible. But it's also words. Yeshua here cares about words. And if you take one word out of his book, then you're making him a liar. And would you want to make Yeshua a liar? I sure wouldn't want to be in that position. Peter says this, "All flesh is as grass, and all the glory of man is the flower of grass. The grass withereth, and the flower fadeth thereof away, but the word of the Lord endureth forever. And this is the word by which the gospel is preached unto you." I love the fact they put that last sentence in there. Because some people say, "Oh, well, up in heaven, there's the perfect Bible." Well, boy, it does a whole lot of good to us up there, doesn't it? You know, we can get there someday in heaven and read it. Glory to God. Hallelujah. Well, this is saying, and this is the word by which, in other words, the preaching that was being done by Peter and the other disciples right then and there when this epistle was being written is the word that endureth forever. Pretty plain English. Now, some people say, "Can't we just get along? I mean, you like the NAS, and you like the NIV, and you like the King James. Can't we just all get along and be one big, happy, polyglot family?" Well, the problem with that is you can't have a consensus Bible, folks. Especially when Bible A says one thing and Bible B says the opposite. What do you do when you put them together? You get zero. And I don't know about you, my Bible is not a zero. It can't be a mixture of the parts of the King James, parts of the NIV, etc., because all the other modern Bible translations contradict the King James in about 30,000 places. Now remember, Paul said very clearly that a little leaven leaveneth the whole lump. This means that even a tiny bit of sin or wickedness put in something quickly spreads to cover the entire system. So if you even have one little thing wrong with your book, then you're in trouble. And besides that, you see, it ends up being a question of this. If you say, "Well, I prefer this Bible, I prefer this Bible," what are you doing? You as a human being, as a mortal, are judging the Word of God. The Word of God is supposed to judge us. Amen? And yet, these people are saying, "Oh, well, I just like the Living Bible." I just like the dead Bible. I just like the Klingon Bible. You know, there's a Klingon New Testament now. From like Star Trek, they actually took the entire, and you know what is, this shows you the power of the authorized version. They translated the King James Bible into Klingon. Word for word. What a book. This is the first book that was sent over a telegraph. This is the first book that was read from the moon. Think about it. What a book that Yahweh has given us. Dare we let anybody judge the Bible? Let's face it. You take all of these Bible scholars, with all due respect, and there's some great men of God out there, all of these preachers, all of these pastors, all of these guys with THDs and PhDs and DDs and, you know, whatever. The point is, you put them all together, and they have the intelligence of a learning disabled fruit fly compared to the power of the Holy Spirit. And how dare we let these, you know, pinhead people judge the Word? Again, the Word is supposed to judge us. Remember what Yahweh said in Psalm 138, I will worship toward thy holy temple and praise thy name for thy loving kindness and thy truth. For thou hast magnified thy word above all thy name. Now let's think about that for a second. Christians get upset, and rightfully so, when people blaspheme, when they cuss, when they take the name of Yahweh in vain or whatever, you know, or they, you know, they hit their head and they say, oh, Jesus Christ, you know, that kind of thing. But he says that he cares more about his word than even his name. And remember, in the days of the tabernacle, if someone used the name of Yahweh wrong, fire would come out from the sanctuary and burn them to a crisp. So what does he think about these people that are, you know, messing around with his word? What's interesting, there's an interesting thing that happened on the John Ankerberg show years ago. They had a debate about the King James issue. And they had several people there defending the King James and several people against it. Some of you may have even seen this. And the funny thing is that one of the King James proponents says, well, don't you know that the guy that translated made the Living Bible, he was so guilty about it that he lost his voice. And for the rest of his life, he couldn't preach except in this hoarse croak. And the funny thing is one of the guys who was anti-King James said, that's not a lie. And then he started to talk, and then all of a sudden he couldn't talk. And he was croaking there on stage. He couldn't. And what's funny is, someone told me this actually in the audience watching this down in Kentucky, when they showed it, they cut that out. Don't mess with the Word. It all comes down to authority. There's an old saying in the South, the two-headed dog don't hunt. And Satan hates authority unless he holds it. Divine authority dethrones human intellect. It makes a mock of the one world government they're trying to build. It destroys their idea of, oh, everyone has their own truth. I hear that all the time from these New Age people. With all due respect and loving Christian charity, I call them Twinkies. New Age Twinkies, because they have cream filling up here. And finally, Satan's conspiracy can only survive in a dualistic worldview. Remember, the word diabolos means to separate, to split, to cause, to drive asunder. So everything in Satan's worldview is dualistic. Again, the Hegelian Illuminati program, I talked about this earlier, two opposing points of view. You have a thesis, you have an antithesis, and you have a synthesis. Let them fight it out, and that creates a false chaos. Now here's the deal though. What does Yahweh say? He says, let God be true, but every man a liar. And he also says that he is not the author of confusion. And when you try to have people reading from Bibles together, in most any church in America nowadays, it's confusion. It's like the Tower of Babel. So you set up two opposing authorities, like for example in the Catholic Church, you have Scripture and tradition, equal, but what happens if they contradict? In the Mormon Church, Scripture and their prophet. Various liberal political philosophies, liberal, conservative, different Bible versions, and oh, yes, we let the scholars decide. So instead of having an infallible pope, Now we have infallible scholars. We replaced the three-tiered tiara of the Pope with the mortarboard of the scholar. But Yahweh wrote only one book. And what if that book is the authorized King James Bible? Again, if we say it's a matter of preference, then we mortals are judging the Bible. Then the authority becomes only human opinion. And as I said before, who are we to judge his book? But how do we know that the authorized version is the real word of Yahweh? Well, we know, first of all, because of the way the devil opposes it. Because of the way that when it was sent out in the 18th and 19th century, it just literally spread the word of God throughout many, many nations and caused revivals that have not been heard of since. I mean, we don't have revivals like they had in the days of Finney, in the days of Moody, in the days of Spurgeon, and all those men preached out of the authorized version, even though at that time there was at least one other Bible out there, a revised version. Again, why the AV? Well, because it says in Psalms 12:6, the words of the Lord are pure words, as silver tried in a furnace of earth, purified 7 times. And look at what the authorized version has come through. Hebrew, Aramaic, because parts of Daniel are written in Aramaic, Greek, Old Syriac, Old Latin, German, and then finally the 7th permutation, the 7th purification into English. Now you might say, well, isn't that sort of, unfair? Well, look at this too. Prophetically, Yeshua said to one congregation, the one in Philadelphia, which many people believe symbolizes the church from 1500 to 1900, I know thy works. Behold, I have set before thee an open door, and no man can shut it. For thou hast a little strength, and hast kept my word, and hast not denied my name. Then the other interesting thing, where the word of a king is, it says in Ecclesiastes 8:4, there is power. The authorized version, why is it called that? Because it was authorized by a king. And as it happens, the first king in England in many, many years, and he had a Jewish name, Jacob, James, with a Davidic ascent that could be traced all the way back to the Judean monarchy. Why? Because it says in Romans 3:1 that the oracles are given to the Jew. Fits together pretty good. Strange coincidences. Our watches are set by English time. Our longitude is determined by Britain. BTUs that we use to measure temperature is a British thermal unit. Absolute time is English. Absolute place is English. Absolute temperature is English. Why shouldn't absolute truth be in English? The bottom line, in terms of fighting the devil and his conspiracy, spiritual warfare is what we're talking about here, folks. Satan has created a confusing mess out there. Ask yourself, do you really have the word of Yahweh in your hands, the living words of the Almighty? Yeshua said, if you abide in me and my words abide in you, you shall ask what you will, and it shall be done unto you. Now, that's one wonderful promise. But how can his words abide in us if we don't know that we have them? If we just think we have some pablum puke paraphrase? What Yeshua wants you to know, he was able to minister with authority because he had no doubt about where that authority came from. Some of these verses state that he cast out demons with his word. Do you have a doubt about where your authority comes from? We know Yeshua is the living word, and we know that the Bible is the living word. When you pray, teach, and preach out of that book, the Holy Spirit is present in a mighty and unprecedented way. And we have watched, just when we open the Bible in a prayer ministry to set people free, it's like kicking the slats out of the devil's kingdom, right and left. The devils tremble just to see that book, just as much as they tremble when they hear his name. We are here in the last days, and the war is heating up fast. Preachers are dropping like flies. Believers are wandering around wrecked and wounded, and the conspiracy, as we have seen, is raging. In this war, the sword of the Spirit, the Holy Bible, is their only offensive weapon. And I ask you, what if yours shoots blanks?